Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Saturday, April 8th, 2023. And we're going to jump right into things tonight. I don't have that much time to talk about a fair number of things that are going on. We're going to see periods of snow, mainly light snow across the central and eastern interior through Monday, though a few spots are going to end up with a bit more snow than that. Gale force low pressure system that's going to be moving up through the Gulf is going to bring windy conditions, precipitation to the Panhandle, and accumulating snow, some of them on the heavier side across portions of the Kenai Peninsula, all the way back toward the Anchorage Bowl and lower, at least Matanuska Valley. Below normal temperatures are expected to hold here through at least mid-month. No signs of any significant early spring warm-ups. And speaking of no warm-up, look at this here. NOAA this morning had the state's low temperature at 34 below zero, 17 below as of early this Saturday afternoon with mostly clear skies. Further toward the interior, ceilings are lowering, the clouds are lowering, and some light snow will be breaking out tonight into Sunday. Fairbanks, 13 degrees. Fairbanks could pick up a few inches of snow pretty easily here later tonight and during the day on Sunday. Further south, Whittier, seeing a little light snow and gusty winds to 35 miles an hour as of early this Saturday afternoon. Ketchikan getting light rain, winds gusting as high as 45 miles an hour with the temperature at 45, and that's all in response to an approaching front associated with that low that'll be sitting down there in through the Gulf. But where do we have advisories? We have winter weather advisories up here in the east central interior along the Alcan border, the upper Tanana Valley, eastern end of the Alaska Range, including Northway, Tok, Eagle. 40-mile Gold Country could pick up as much as 4 to 8 inches of snow through noontime on Monday. Areas further west, snowfall amounts will be lighter, maybe 2 to 4 inches in the Fairbanks area, and then lesser amounts west back toward Bettles and Tanana, though you could see snow also all the way up there along Fort Yukon to Arctic Village. Further south, we have the winter weather advisory for the eastern Kenai, areas of western Prince William Sound back into the Anchorage Bowl. 4 to as much as 12 inches of snow falling in these areas. Some of the heaviest snow will fall around Portage Valley and on up through Whittier, where nearly a foot of snow could fall through Sunday afternoon, early evening. And Anchorage, the eastern side of Anchorage, Hillside, Eagle could pick up as much as maybe 7 to 11 inches of snowfall later tonight through Sunday early evening. Low pressure is situated now entering the Gulf, and it's going to pull back to the north and west. Frontal system is going to move up into the Panhandle, bringing gusty winds, rain, and snow. But as that moisture pulls back toward the eastern Kenai and into the Anchorage Bowl, it's going to be in the form of accumulating snow. Very cold air sitting up here across the northern part of the state, northwestern quadrant. It's going to sit there another day or so before it begins to move eastward, and it moderates slightly. And then this area here along the Alcan border will fill in with snow as well. And further off to the west, we have the next frontal system that'll be pushing in through the western portion of the Aleutians. So the low is located this Saturday afternoon, entering the lower southeastern Gulf. It'll then slowly track back toward the north and west, pulling this frontal system up through the Panhandle. That'll bring the gusty winds, rain on the outer coast and southern areas, snow in the inner coastal mountains. We'll see these couple of weaker disturbances and some moisture feed along here, keeping the snow developing and going in the eastern interior. And then cold air just in place here across the northwest part of the state. Northerly flow keeping scattered snow showers going across the Alaska Peninsula. So late tonight, early Sunday morning, the initial low will be pulling back toward the north and west, and then we will have that low by Sunday afternoon sitting there just off the Kenai Peninsula, producing accumulating snow and some gustier winds that could create areas of blowing snow. So travel along the Seward Highway will not be good, especially going from Anchorage down toward Whittier or Seward, and light snow continuing along areas of the interior. By the time we get into Monday, things should begin to wind down. Still some lingering rain, snow showers in areas of south central back through the Panhandle, but then out toward the west. This frontal system will be moving up toward the southwest coast, bringing light snow along these areas as we go into very late Monday night and on Tuesday morning. Further south, it'll be in the form of rain, especially through the eastern Aleutians and the lower half of the Alaska Peninsula. So temperatures will be coldest Sunday morning. Some isolated 30 below readings appear across the western and northwest interior. Temperatures should stay above freezing across a good section of the Panhandle. Still chilly Anchorage on up toward the south side here. Temperatures in the lower to mid-teens, and then afternoon highs on Sunday will be back up into the 40s as we go across the Panhandle, and further north and west, maybe back up near 30 from Anchorage area southward, and further north and west, single digits above and below zero, especially across the northwestern part of the state. Monday morning lows still quite cold. Could still see an isolated 30-degree reading here as you get up in through the northwest and west central interior, and temperatures along areas of the Panhandle should generally be in the 30s, extending out to Dutch Harbor about 35 for a low. And then as we go into Monday afternoon, temperatures will still be in generally the 40s across the Panhandle. Little downslope could even help Skagway reach 48 degrees, whereas I think temperatures areas of the Kenai Peninsula could be back up around or just above freezing, even approaching, say, Anchorage. And then further north and west, we'll still see daytime highs only in the single digits above or a bit below zero across the northwestern third of the state. Quick check of the temperature outlook. 6 to 10-day temperature outlook centered on April 16th. Below or much below normal temperatures centered on the southwest quadrant of the mainland. So this is below to much below normal temperatures. Thing is, it's going to be a bit drier, though. Probably because we're going to have more of a northeast flow. So the west side of the state will see drier conditions, but precipitation may average a little above normal along the Alcan border, southeast interior, into portions of the Panhandle. But for those of you wanting any type of warmer spring weather, nothing on the horizon. It's going to stay cold through at least mid-month.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned on Sunday or Monday, IFR conditions will persist across areas of the Brooks Range down through the central eastern interior and then along areas of the northeastern Gulf Coast and the inner mountains here of the Panhandle. Low pressure out over the Gulf. There'll be a frontal system lifting northward with a couple of waves of low pressure moving back toward the north and northwest with that. Also, IFR conditions, Norton Sound out over the Bering Strait and Seward Peninsula. Very cold pocket of air sitting here over the lower Chukchi Sea, Seward Peninsula, northwestern part of the state, and another frontal system working its way up through the lower Bering Sea, affecting the far western and central Aleutians. By Sunday afternoon, still an area of IFR conditions across the east central interior between the Brooks and Alaska range, pockets of light snow, lowering ceilings and visibilities along areas of the Panhandle. Still some IFR along the inner coastal mountains there of northwest Canada, and a broad area of IFR conditions from the eastern Aleutians back out through the western Aleutians and lower Bering Sea in response to a frontal system that's going to work its way northeastward across the Bering Sea toward the southwest coast by Tuesday. So Monday morning, IFR still along the Alcan border up through areas of the Brooks Range and North Slope, eastern Arctic coast, also especially the intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle, northeastern Gulf Coast, and then again out over areas of the central lower Bering Sea and in through the central western Aleutians as that frontal system works its way northeastward. It will have a band of snow, some mixed precipitation further south here through areas of the central eastern Aleutians, trying to push up into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. This will be making landfall across the southwest coast as we go into Tuesday. Otherwise, conditions should at least improve to MVFR across much of the mainland as we get into Monday afternoon. IFR conditions are expected to hold on Sunday up there the Brooks Range along Anatuvik as well as Adigan passes. Further south and west, Lake Clark on the south end there of the Alaska Range, VFR likely Sunday, but as you go north, MVFR at Merrill. And then Rainy Pass, we'll see MVFR conditions flirt with IFR conditions by midday. And as we round up through the northern or central portion of the Alaska Range, Windy Pass IFR, Isabel should generally see IFR conditions as well. And further east at Mentasta, IFR conditions may be giving way to MVFR conditions by Sunday afternoon. Further south and west, Tanita, also IFR conditions there Sunday morning, giving way to MVFR conditions by afternoon. And Portage Pass may start out with IFR conditions trying to give way to MVFR conditions because we have that moisture bumping up along the Chugach Mountains there in the Kenai Mountains on the west side, especially of Prince William Sound. And in the far north of the Panhandle, IFR conditions are likely generally throughout the day Sunday at Chilkoot and White. Freezing levels aloft, well, they're highest behind me, but we do see the surface freezing line well south of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, coming back up along the Gulf Coast in through the inner channels of the Panhandle, bumping up 2,000 to 4,000 feet, Haida Gwaii down toward British off of Vancouver. And then with that frontal system to the west, we do have higher freezing levels aloft as high as 6,000 and 8,000 feet, pushing into the western and central Aleutians. The greatest threat, though, for icing will be with the low pressure that's back here toward the western Gulf on Sunday, with a front extending southeast of there with waves of low pressure working along that above 5,000 feet there across areas of the Panhandle, Dixon Entrance, and then back out toward the west, especially the eastern Kenai west side of Prince William Sound could be some considerable moderate icing above 3,000 feet. And behind me, just this band of potential, at least isolated moderate icing associated with that frontal system out there through the lower Bering. Strongest jet stream level winds at 30,000 feet. We have a broad trough that dips down through the Gulf of Alaska into the North Pacific. Ahead of it, 160 knots, slamming up into near Vancouver and British Columbia. On the backside, northwest winds upwards of 130 and 45 knots, bringing it down to 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, a couple of low circulations, one in the western Gulf, another up here on the north side of the Seward Peninsula, and bringing it down to 3,000 feet. And we see some stronger winds coming in there around Haida Gwaii in through the British Columbia coast, lower Panhandle, and then behind me, broad area winds into the western Aleutians. Greatest threat for some isolated severe turbulence will be just off of the Haida Gwaii and the Panhandle coast in through the southeast portion of the Gulf, surface to 6,000 feet, and then a broad area out across the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 4,000 feet.
We can't just put the fires out because we can't put them out. We've tried that now for a century, and it doesn't work. It just makes the next one worse.
You may see a place like this and think, total devastation. And it's not your fault for thinking that.
But that depiction is, as we've learned from countless experts over the last 2 weeks, not the whole story, and not how you should think about wildfires.
The truth is, there are lots of types of habitats out west, and fire affects them all in unique ways. So it's important to start thinking about the big picture with wildland fires. So let's first rewind. To help us understand what's going on out west, Rob and I started calling up the experts, and what we found was that the story of fire, particularly in the west, is complex. So to understand it, we planned a road trip.
Road trip time.
The goal of our road trip was to see as many forests as we could and meet experts around the region to help us understand the role fire plays out here. First destination was to find the forest burned by the now famous Great Fires of 1910. And at the heart of what is known as the Big Blow-Up, the logical first place to stop, the city of Wallace.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Good. Haley and I are in this cute town of Wallace, Idaho, which was completely destroyed by the 1910 fires. You can see how much damage this fire actually did. Let's send up the drone and see what the surroundings look like now. What we found was a small town surrounded by a dense forest, with every single tree just over 100 years old.
So everything we see behind us now, that's all new growth since 1910.
And to help us put these historic fires and the forests around Wallace in perspective, We met up with historian Diane Smith.
This is Wallace, and here are your fires.
All of this is the 1910 fires.
This is not that unusual. The fact is, it just was at a time in our development as a country. We noticed it, we paid attention to it, and we got the national attention for it.
Right. As it turns out, these fires helped reinforce the idea at the time that every fire needed to be suppressed at all costs. And this suppression for so long has led to new problems, namely thick forests full of fuel. But don't just take my word for it. Let me show you the difference. Notice how different this place is than this one that has been thinned out quite heavily in the past, or like an area like this that's been burnt quite frequently. In fact, both of these areas show how many forests would have looked in the past under regular burns. The dead and low-growing material gets consumed easily by fire, very much unlike this forest, which has had fire suppression for over 100 years and could lead to a high-intensity fire.
And all of this dry, dead material, that's problematic.
So we went looking for a big fire and just followed the smoke. Oh gosh, huge crown fire. I gotta get this. These high-intensity fires aren't great because in many forests they kill all the trees over a large area, even in forests that used to be very resistant to frequent fires. And nobody knows that better than the people that work in this particular forest.
There's green coming back, and I guess I've gotten somewhat used to it, and I still have hope that the entire Sierra Nevadas won't look like this, that we can maybe get ahead of it. So the fires nowadays can move from the surface right into the tree canopies really easily, where in the past, fires would have kept trees pruned, they would have kept fuel densities low, and so now you end up with a lot more high severity fires in the West than had a fire regime kept under its historic recurrence. This to me is more a lesson of fire exclusion and keeping fire out of the system. If we're keeping it out of when it would burn with a beneficial effect, it will burn, and the probability of it burning at an unbeneficial state is higher.
So again, this is where it's complicated. We thought if only we could stop the fires, we'd win the fight. But the fires like the King Fire here show that stopping the fires only made it worse. Add that to the fact that we're living closer than ever to these wild lands. So to help us understand the wildland-urban interface, we met up with CAL FIRE. And as we were pulling up to this neighborhood, one of the residents quickly came out to tell us about the latest fire.
Yeah, our biggest fear is fire. It was very scary. I mean, everybody was honking and get out, and you know, there's a fire.
This is the risk across California. The response piece alone isn't going to solve this challenge if the homeowners aren't organized.
Because we're all in the same boat. One match away from everybody losing everything. It's a real fear.
Literally, we could have that fire spread up in here within a matter of seconds.
Wow.
California is going to have fires. We're not going to stop all the fires in California, so we have to have an infrastructure that's fire resistant. We need to work on policies that help us engage in active management of our forest. That's using prescribed fire as a tool. It's all the things in the toolbox. It's a combination of managing our forest and a combination of protecting our communities that are in them.
If it wasn't complicated enough, this made it very clear that you can't just let the fires burn whenever they start. The forests need to be managed to help mitigate the risk to us. But using fire seems to be one of the keys to making things safer, and knowing the science behind fire is always key to implementing good management. Fire Sciences Lab, right over here. So we made a stop at the Missoula Fire Lab to try to understand what we know about fire.
What? You see the flames at the very top and how they're sticking to the slope?
They really are. Everybody's laying down.
They're laying down. Well, that's flame attachment. Actually a very difficult thing to understand.
Here at the Fire Lab, the scientists study the basics of fire. Understanding the complexities here helps firefighters and forest managers in the field better predict and fight wildland fires.
The fires are inevitable. The only choices that we really have is what kind of fire to have and when do we want it. And that's it. Almost? Ready. You're ready. Jason's ready.
Mark's team is prepping to light a huge bed of precisely cut cardboard.
You're not going to be in any danger. So when the lights go out, don't move. Gasoline.
This is one of many experiments they'll run to understand the physics of fire, how it moves, how it spreads, And all of this measured by precise scientific instruments and high-speed cameras. Tens of thousands of pieces of cardboard up in flames in mere seconds. The ongoing research will help us better understand fire with the ultimate goal that we can live better with it. But can we do that? There is one forest we knew of that seems to have figured out this coexistence with fire, a place where fires burn all summer, every summer. It's part of their way of life and a mentality we wanted to know about. And here we went out with our guides Frank Lake and Steve Valentine, who work with the local U.S. Forest Service and tribe to help keep a healthy forest. This is perfect. The fire's basically come through and cleared out the understory, and all that's left are the trees.
Yeah, it's black and it's charred, and you just see a few of the earliest sprouts, but you come back in here a year, it's going to be alive again.
And to many, this may seem destroyed, but they view it differently here.
That fire's medicine. Because it's not if it comes, it's when it comes. We need fire, and fire needs us.
You see, fire needs people to remind us how important fire is to the ecosystem. Frank and Steve's ancestors have been burning this forest for millennia. It's now part of what makes the forest special. They just want to make sure that it's not forgotten.
Basically, what you leave behind is what's important.
When they say this is your foods and your medicines, your sacred places, your springs, your water, that's essential. That's who we are as people. We have to learn to live with fire. We have to learn to respect fire. We have to maintain that security. That's why I do what I do.
Haley and I have learned a lot on our journey. We've learned that fire is complicated, and it's not as black and white as we make it out to be, and it is an integral part of our forests. They've had fire running through them for thousands of years, and they will continue to have fire in them in the future. And we can't always put the fires out. We have to decide what kind of fires to live with, and that is why we need to work with these fire crews from around the country. We also need a public who understands the importance of fire on the landscape. A healthy forest, you see, is a forest that lives with fire.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine weather segment of our show, and we start with the sea ice edge. We're going to take a state perspective today. Ice firmly in place across the Arctic, but as we get down through the Bering Strait and in through the northern Bering Sea, the edge of the ice, this ice is not expected to drift southward too much, nor is it expected to retreat northward. We're not anticipating any warmer south-southwest pushes of air up into this area of the Bering. In fact, if anything, some very cold air is residing now over the lower Chukchi Sea, Seward Peninsula, and that feature will shift eastward early in the week, and then another round of colder air will swing in along the northwest coast by Thursday of the upcoming week. Overall, temperatures are expected to average below to much below normal across the southwest quadrant of the mainland, so this ice will likely be holding fast here over the next week or two. No signs of any significant spring warm-ups. As far as what we can expect for the inner channels on Sunday, we have frontal system pushing up into this area. Winds northeast to north 15 to 20 knots, Petersburg northward, but 30-knot winds there along Dixon entrance could produce waves upwards of 11 feet. Outer coast winds will be south, turning easterly once you get from Yakutat westward toward Cape Suckling. Waves there in the waters within 15 nautical miles, we're looking at 15 to 18-foot waves. On Monday, winds and waves will be coming down a bit. For the inner channels, south winds 15 knots, Ketchikan up through Petersburg, but northerly through Lynn Canal at 15 knots with waves there a few feet. Outer coast south winds to southeast around 15 knots and waves generally running around 9 to 11 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, some stronger winds, outflow winds coming here at the entrance of Cook Inlet to 50 knots, could create waves as high as 12 to 15 feet. Across Prince William Sound, northwest winds 25 knots, 6-foot waves, and the far north end of Cook Inlet, we're looking at north winds at 15 knots with 3-foot waves. By Monday, winds will be southeast 20 knots across Prince William Sound with waves of 4 feet. Look for northeast winds turning north and then still northwesterly, upwards of 40 to 50 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves around 10 to 11 feet. Across Kodiak Island, we'll have gale force winds out of the northwest to 40 knots, 9-foot waves there within Shelikof Strait. Winds do come down as you go across the length of the Alaska Peninsula. Variable winds 10-15 knots, the south end, waves 6 feet on the Bering side, 4 feet south of False Pass. And on Monday, still northwesterly gales 35 to near 40 knots around Kodiak Island. As we get out, though, down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, there is a frontal system that will be moving up through this area, so winds fall off to around 10 to 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet on the North Pacific side, and generally around 4 feet on the Bering side. For the Aleutian chain, winds will be west-southwest around 20 to 25 knots across much of the length, waves anywhere from 5 to 8 feet on the Pacific side, and anywhere from 7 to, say, 9 feet there on the Bering side. And on Monday, winds will be southerly across the eastern Aleutians at around 20 to 25 knots, turning southwesterly, increasing to 30 knots west of Adak. And waves will generally be around 5 to 8 feet away from the shelter of the Aleutians up on the Bering side, and generally 7 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side. Along the southwest coast, we still have the ice winds will be westerly there into the Norton Sound, the lower Yukon Delta, and southwesterly into Bristol Bay, but northwesterly there, into Kuskokwim Bay, and northwesterly there at Bristol Bay. Variable winds 10 knots with 5-foot waves in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George. On Monday, the front will be approaching and moving toward the southwest coast. Out ahead of it, winds turn more, develop an easterly component as high as 35 knots there at St. Matthew with 11-foot waves. Still west-northwest around 10 knots into Norton Sound and the lower Yukon Delta. Along the Arctic coast, winds will be east-northeast, 15 to 20 knots, turning to the west through the Bering Strait around 10 knots, as well as into Norton Sound with ice in place. And on Monday, winds will be westerly 10 to 15 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, and then kind of a mix. Look for winds along the northwest coast in lower Chukchi Sea, west to southwest around 10 knots, turning more northwest to northerly on the north side of St. Lawrence Island and across Norton Sound. But as I mentioned, we're not anticipating a whole lot of movement with the ice, and with the upcoming days, the cold temperatures are going to persist, especially across the west side of the state through mid-April.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.